We have studied law of territory altogether, right? Actually, I'm planning to start with law of sea this class. The thing is that we can just repeat what we have done in law of territory once again. One question. How are borders determined? Does anyone remember? Let's start from here. Louder. Okay, there are factual data and there are legal ways. And you were about to say something, I guess?
Either we use natural sources, natural features like mountains or rivers, or we just benefit from the long trees and methods.
And they are artificial factual data. That's true. How about legal ones? Do you want to continue, Matt?
I was just going to say that the territories are determined by treaties.
Treaties are one of the legal ways. That's true. What else?
ICJ's decisions, I mean international court decisions, and arbitration commission's decisions.
True. Either under legal ways. We have still two methods. The first one is like the case of Mosul for Turkey, which is determined by a decision of ICJ. And the other one is just like Lausanne for Turkey, which is indicating the case of what? Treaties. Plus, from time to time, when the parties show consent for that, then we see that arbitrators also step into the game. All right? So you know how borders are determined at the moment. One more point. We have said that territory is terrestrial territory. Territory is a part of a piece of soil. And the borders are determined, a state is established upon, and whatever resource is found on that territory is also part of sovereignty of that state. So sovereignty includes entire sources on the territory. Do you agree? How about what lays beneath the soil?
It's also included.
It's also included, just like the potatoes and carrots on the territory, like, you know, they are the sources, of course, of that state. If there is coal and other mines and oil and gas, they are also part of the sovereignty of that state. So that state has full control over those sources. How about water? What happens? If it's a fountain, of course, that's not a huge question. The thing is that what if it's a river that flows amongst borders? Then the states are not trying to prevent each other benefiting from that water. Even the spring of that river is found in one state, this means then the state is the owner of that source, still waters are shared. How they are shared is a huge question, and it depends. However, waters are somehow shared. So that's one exception. If oil is flowing down, you know, no one shares oil, of course, that's something else. But water is survival. Therefore, it is shared. States do not blockade water falling through other borders. Do you have any questions related to that? Yes, please.
For instance, was it the case that Syria and Iraq we had some issues with Syria and Iraq regarding
Definitely.
the Euphrates River?
It is always problematic how to share the waters because there are spring holders and there are also down coastal states. And down coastal states remain unadvantaged on one hand. On the other hand, they're also not the owner of the spring. Therefore, everything at that point has to be resolved according to the negotiations, diplomacy. And you're true. I mean, at the moment with Syria and Iraq, it was problematic. And at the moment, it's more problematic. Even we had a moment in which Daesh was controlling some of the water dams in Syria. For that reason, Turkey had to take some precautions, like cutting off the entire water, because this is known as l'état de nécessité, for instance. It was necessity to do so in order to prevent terrorists controlling more lands and so on. Okay? Or countermeasures before things got more worse. Then Turkey had taken some precautions and stopped sending the water. We have said that terrestrial territory is important for the sources on it and beneath it. Plus, the entire air above that territory is known as the aerial territory of the sovereign state. So the state has full sovereignty in that area as well. In addition to that, we can also talk about maritime territory, fluvial territory. So once a new state is established, then that state automatically has its also territorial waters. Unless it's Switzerland, of course. What I mean is that if that state has shores to the seas, all right? At that point, we can start talking about law of sea. While talking about law of sea, there are two things that we are supposed to be aware of. First of all, what a sea is, how to define it. Secondly, what a ship is, how to define it. Sea is quite important because of the resources it has in it. It's a huge reservoir of sources. So the resources in it are important. Secondly, transportation and communication is also generated through seas and oceans. This is the second importance for international law. International legal norms are established because of those importances. International law takes care of sea public law, so how states interact with each other related to waters, international waters and national waters and economic use of waters. Plus, free trade is at the moment a huge concept. Therefore, we also require international private law, which is also known as maritime commercial law. So from fisheries to when your cargo is sent, when you make your order, through AliExpress, then it is sent to you, it's shipped to you by ships. And this is also subject under maritime commercial law. So seas are not assessed as a complete corpus. Seas are assessed by international law according to certain areas, according to certain zones. So we can talk about internal waters. We can talk about territorial waters. There are contiguous zones, there are exclusive economic zones, there are continental shelves and high seas, international waters. So how do we separate them? Our evaluation basis is sovereignty of states. This is the first evaluation basis. The second criteria is where the state can exercise some portion of control. We're not talking about full sovereignty at that point, but some powers. And there are also zones that are open for all states. This is how we classify seas under international law. We also classify ships under international law. Well, there are merchant ships and official ships. Merchant ships are your private yachts, are merchant ships. Fishery boats are merchant ships. Passenger cruise liners are merchant ships. Cargo vessels are merchant ships, and so on. We can just continue giving examples, of course, but roughly we can talk about those kinds of ships as merchant ships. There are also official ships. Official ships are majorly owned by the state or by the organs of the state, organizations, institutions of the state. Like, well, we're at Bilkent University. We don't have oceanary or anything like that in this university. But if I'm not mistaken, Boğaziçi University has it, or some universities in Istanbul has it. They have their own ships for research purposes. So they can conduct research related to water, living things in the water, geography under the water, or sources under the water, or how to generate electricity, for instance, through waters. What I mean by waters is seas and oceans. Therefore, universities can own their own research ships. Those research ships are official ships. They belong to universities, and the university is a public university owned by the state. What else? Navies belong to the state. The thing is that Navy ships are also different from each other. Some of them just carry people. Some of them has some weapons on it, some explosives on it. And some of them are submarines. The others are aircraft carriers, like swimming cities, they're referred like that. And plus, we can also talk about tankers. So that's a Navy ship, but it is there to tank fresh water, for instance, or gas and oil. That's also another thing. So there are battleships, and there are non-combatant public service ships. There's a classification still in between. Battleships are those that we have mentioned as aircraft carriers, or any kind of Navy ship that has weapons and explosives on it. And non-combatant ones are, that can be a Navy ship, but to carry fresh water, to carry oil and gas, to carry sanitary, whatever. Or public service ships, university research ships belong to this group. Plus commercial ships, of course. States can also be engaged in commerce and trade, international trade. At that point, the ships that they're using for their own shipments is known like that. Do you have any questions at that point? So we have classified roughly sea zones according to sovereignty of the state, according to the power of the state to control certain issue areas, plus international waters, high seas, that all states can benefit from. And we have classified ships under two groups. The first one is about merchant ships, the other one is about official ships. Official ships are owned by the states directly. Merchant ships are owned by private people or corporations or companies and firms. Why do we classify ships? Why do we classify sea zones? We have classified the sea zones in order to see who has what kind of rights, powers, and duties in that zone. And we have classified the ships in order to be able to classify the content of the authority of the coastal state or the flagship, the owner of the flag of that ship. International law does not define what a ship is. That's a question mark because under certain conditions, certain ships can pass, for instance, certain cannot. There's a captain in a ship to navigate, but sometimes there are ships that are automatically navigated. So this can be confusing. Is it still considered as a ship or not? and so on. There are many types. There are technical questions, and they create gray areas for international straits, for instance, for the Straits of Istanbul, for instance, because we'll come to that actually, we'll talk about international straits, but according to Montreux Treaty, certain types of ships can pass through and certain cannot. And under that conditions, we have to ask certain questions. Who is navigating? And no one is navigating. That's automatically navigated. That's remotely navigated. It's full automatic or half and so on. And its engines come to question from time to time. And how are they fueled is another question. Therefore, international law does not define ship. Because anything that can float over waters can be considered as ship. Still, it's still creating certain gray areas for us. Well, we have certain questions like, what if a battleship harms coast of a state? We ask that question because of this. I'm sure most of you have seen this scene, right? You remember what it is? Does anyone want to tell us what it was about? Batu?
After Turkey downed one of Russia's jets at our border with Syria, the Russians sent naval contingents to the Syrian coast, and while they were passing through the Bosphorus, one of their military members had a cannon and was showing it around.
Yeah, with a rocket launcher, bazooka. Well, Russian ships, Navy ships, are allowed to pass through Turkish straits, but certain ships, not all kinds of ships. The thing is that they can do so because they're living in the Black Sea region, and the Black Sea region can only be connected to the rest of the world through Turkish straits. The thing is that during their passage, they have to remain innocent and non-threatening. Is it non-threatening? You know what? Having weapons is okay. The state lets individuals as well having weapons. If you're authorized for that by the state, then you can keep the gun. The thing is that you keep your gun. If someone starts showing the gun to you from time to time, it is not okay. This is threatening. There is a message there that you're supposed to get. It is okay when there are weapons on board, but it is not okay when they start showing them, because that strait is going through a huge metropole. Civilians are living there. The question is, well, who is he targeting? Who is he threatening? The civilians? The city? So, what if they have harmed the coast of Turkey? What if they have harmed some Turkish citizens? And so on. This is one question. What if a commercial ship harms the coast of a state? Like here. Do you remember that event taking place? I guess that was not long ago. 8th of April 2018 is written on the news. So that's a historical mention on Bosphorus. And that's a commercial ship, a heavy vessel. If I'm not mistaken, its flag was belonging to Panama. And it did not require to get a guide. And something wrong has happened. It could not stop. And it has hit to a historical mention. So an international or a foreign ship, a foreign commercial vessel has given harm to Turkish coast, to a home. It's a historical mention. And it was full of what? Do you remember? No one is killed there, but a huge harm was given because what was in that mention? Valuable paintings and historical antique goods all around that. And well, it can be compensated, amount of money can be paid, but historical goods cannot be brought back. So it's a huge damage given. The question is, what's next then? What's going to happen? Or we can ask the question, what if a ship is owned by a private person and it is damaged by a site. Abramovich is quite famous for the yachts he owns, right? And they're expensive, huge yachts. What if it is damaged by a state? You have already studied state responsibility, so that part is okay for you. The first two questions require knowledge of international public law, international private law. We'll come to that. Let's start with the sources that next time you won't be forgetting in the exam, my dears. You have answered the questions, and no, most of students did not mention the sources. You're talking about state responsibility, and it has a source, and most of the students did not mention it, unfortunately. And how many times I told you to mention them? At least 40 times. For law of seas, we have two sources. One of them is 82 UNCLOS Agreement, United Nations Convention on the Law of Sea. The other one is taken as one single source, but that's not true. Well, that's known as 1958 UN Conference on the Law of Sea, which has generated some conventions. So some refer to that as 58 Convention. However, 58 Convention is composed of 4 different conventions. The first one is about territorial sea and the contiguous zone. The second convention is about the continental shelf. The third one is about the high seas. And the last one is about the living resources. It is about high seas, and the fourth one is about fishing and conservation of living resources in the high seas. So we have 58 Convention, we have 82 UNCLOS. 58 Convention has 4 different conventions in it. Keep this in mind. Let's start with the maritime zones. I don't want you to be under huge information bombardment. So in this class, I'm planning to talk only about what internal waters are, what a baseline is, and what territorial waters are. That must be enough for this class. And now, a map is coming. It can be confusing. There are 2 different maps. If you feel confused, ask questions. All right? Now, just concentrate on this part, all right? Don't see what's happening here. And what we're talking about is, at the moment, is an island. So there are no close countries or other islands around. It's an island, it's standing there alone, and this is the territory. If it has some lakes and rivers in it, they're known as internal waters. Whatever is on the territorial, on terrestrial territory. Plus, if it has some harbors and bays, they're also known as internal waters. Then we can talk about a baseline around the island. I'll tell you what it is. But there's a baseline for a measurement unit. From the baseline, when we measure our first 12 nautical miles, the first 12 nautical miles give us the territorial waters of that island. All right? What's the nautical miles? That's correct, a measurement unit. Then, the second 12 nautical miles that we can measure from the ending point of territorial sea gives us the contiguous zone. How's that in Turkish? Nope. Nope. How's that? Say it louder. Nope. Bitişik bölge. karasuları bitişik bölge. So the first 12 nautical miles give us the territorial waters or the territorial sea. You know, when you're standing on the beach of Turkey, like in Antalya, Bodrum, where you are, and once you jump into the water, you did not leave the country yet. You know this because you're still in territorial waters of that country, and you cannot leave country by swimming that easily. I mean, while swimming, you shouldn't be anxious because 12 nautical miles make something like 23 kilometers, and probably you're swimming 1 kilometer in some like 40 minutes. So don't be anxious while swimming. The first 12 nautical miles give you the territorial sea. The next 12 nautical miles gives you the contiguous zone. The third zone is measured again from the baseline, 200 nautical miles this time. And that area is known as exclusive economic zone. The yellow area that you can see on the map. But this time we have measured from the baseline, okay? Not from the ending of contiguous zone. From baseline, 200 nautical miles. And Turkish name for that is given by you, I guess. Münhasır ekonomik bölge. This one, EEZ, is exclusive economic zone. And then we can also talk about continental shelf. Continental shelf is something you have already studied in your high school under the class of geography. It is the natural prolongation of the continent. The continent does not exactly end where the sea starts. The continent is here, sea starts here, and then the continent has a natural prolongation that goes beneath the waters to a certain point. And for the geography, we cannot set limits, of course. But for international legal reasons, there is a limit. So the claims for continental shelf cannot exceed 350 nautical miles. Some countries have a very huge continental shelf that lasts long miles, and some of them don't have it. So it depends. Did I hand you in the attendance, by the way? Yes? Okay. So continental shelf changes for each country, how it is, because it's something geographical. What we have learned is that the claims cannot exceed 350 nautical miles. If this one was confusing for you, another map showing the very same thing. Here we come across with the terrestrial territories, all right? And internal waters are found there, rivers and lakes and so on, plus those, if there's a harbor here, if there's a bay here, they are also considered as internal waters. And then there is a baseline here in the sea for our measurements. From the baseline, the first 12 nautical miles is, you tell me now, territorial sea, territorial waters of the coastal state. This is known as a coastal state. Kıyıdaş ülke. The second 12 nautical miles above territorial waters is known as what? Contiguous zone. Territorial waters, contiguous zone. And from the baseline, we measure 200 nautical miles for which zone? This time, exclusive economic zone. And then, if the country has a continental shelf, it is allowed to have claims until 350 nautical miles. And what comes after that miles? high seas, international waters are found there. Are you confused at any point? Yes, please. Actually, I'll give you a detailed explanation of that. What you have to keep in mind is that continental shelf, how's that in Turkish? You know that word. Okay. Continental shelf is a geographical being. So the continents do not simply end when the sea starts here. The continent has a natural prolongation that continues beneath the waters. And it changes from country to country how that geographical shape is that. The states make certain claims related to their continental shelves. And international law sets limits to continental shelf, saying that you can have continental shelf claims until 350 nautical miles, but not more. It is just like when United States say that England is a part of my continent, therefore it also belongs to me. You know, such claims will not be done. All right? But I'll explain. That was not a good explanation what I have given. It was just brief and rough one. We'll move to that. Let's start talking about baselines. As you have seen here, the baseline and where the beach is are not the same line. Why is that so? Sometimes when you're standing on that sand, you see that last night sea was until here. And it pulled back somehow, right? It moves. And sometimes it pulls quite far away from the land. Baseline is the seaward limits of the sea. Seaward limits mean not when the sea enters to the land in its utmost, but the opposite, when the sea pulls to its maximum. Then that limit is the baseline. It is the outermost points of the sea, not when it enters to land, but when it pulls back from the land. Did you get it? I see some question marks in your eyes, actually. Are you fine with that? Okay. This is a traditional method. Therefore, it's a part of what? You tell me. Customary law. It is for the, it's calculated like that for the advantage of the coastal state. So it is known as outermost points of the sea, or it's also known as the seaward limits of the sea. That customary law unit is translated into codified laws to the Geneva Convention, so the 58 Convention on the territorial sea and contiguous zone. It's also mentioned by the 82 Convention. Okay? So it's customary law, plus it's also mentioned by those two agreements. And that baseline is a unit for us to do the measurements related to territorial waters, to measure where the contiguous zone is, and to be able to measure where exclusive economic zone is. Any questions? Well, actually, once you start Googling on that, you'll see diverse maps related to find out where the baseline is, because that can be confusing from time to time. When there is a river, for instance, running into the water, then how to measure it. So, but you don't need that information for this class now, because we're more international relations concentrated than law discipline. Let's talk a little bit about internal waters. Internal waters are, of course, the lakes that the territory, that coastal state has. The lakes and rivers and harbors and bays. Not bays, but bays. Internal waters belong to 100% jurisdiction area of the coastal state. So the state has full sovereignty over its internal waters. And although we did not speak about it yet, I'll tell you what it is. Just keep in mind that through internal waters, there is no right of innocent passage. I'll tell you what it is. We'll come to that. Just keep in mind, innocent passage is not a right in internal waters. Now one exception is coming. What is that? At the moment, because the entire world order is based upon neoliberal economic system, which means free trade and less state intervention, states tend to keep their rivers or internal waters open for each other on behalf of free trade. All right? Like Danube in Europe, like Rhine in Europe. Those rivers are going through numerous states, and you can see ships sailing, and not only passengers, they also carry cargoes in between states. So states are not stopping those ships. States are not asking for extra permissions. They just let them flow by. And this is kept like that on behalf of what? Free trade, on behalf of free trade, for international trade. And the host country has absolute sovereignty. It is the pure jurisdiction area of that state. Any questions until here? Internal waters are also okay. Then we can move to perhaps, before moving that. The thing is that we have said that states keep their rivers, for instance, open for international trade. Therefore, although there is no right for innocent passage, states behave as if there is innocent passage and let the vessels navigate through those rivers. But there are certain exceptions. Or for instance, we have said that harbors are internal waters, and states can keep their internal waters close to foreign elements. However, we know that, you have been to numerous harbors, I'm sure, and there you have seen that foreign ships and yachts and so on can simply sail in. Why is that so? Because of free trade. What are the limits? Are military ports. Foreign vessels can enter into Turkish harbors, Turkish bays, but they cannot enter into military ports, for instance. So military ports are always kept closed to foreign elements. During epidemics, ports are closed. Imagine, do you remember Zika virus? It was coming from Zika virus? No. Latin America, Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. And imagine, ship is coming from Brazil and it is trying to approach your harbor. If it's carrying that epidemics, then your city can be contaminated by that first, and then the entire land perhaps. Therefore, during epidemics, harbors, ports, bays can be kept close to foreign elements. And during threats, of course. One state, state A, is having some tensions with state B, and either they're in war, then when a ship from state B is approaching to state A, probably state A will be suspicious about the intentions, so probably will not accept those ships approaching to its own harbors. Or if it's having some tensions, therefore they are not trusting each other anymore because of security reasons, then state A will keep its internal waters close to state B for security reasons during threats. All right? So those are the exceptions of keeping internal waters open to foreign elements. And of course, warships. They require permission before they enter. We're not talking about warships when we're talking, because we have given that all those internal waters are kept open for one reason. This is free trade. So Navy is not there for free trade, as you can imagine. Therefore, they need an extra permission. Authorization is necessary. Let's move to territorial waters. Now you know that territorial waters are found in the first 12 nautical miles measured from the baseline of the coastal state. All right? And territorial waters are pure territory of the coastal state. If it is territory of the coastal state, this means the coastal state has full jurisdiction in that area. It also has full sovereign rights in that area. It can exercise 100% control in that area. At the moment, the trend is that states are granted, foreign states are granted innocent passage rights. So in territorial waters, we can talk about innocent passage rights. Innocent passage is not a right in internal waters, but it's a right in territorial waters. Because territorial waters are territories of the coastal states, the air above territorial waters are considered as the national airspace of the coastal state. And of course, the state also has, the sea is not just the surface, It has fishes in it. It has pearls in it. What else? Caviar is a good example. Oil is a good example. So it has many minerals also in it and so on. Or it can also generate energy. So whatever sources are found in the territorial waters, they all belong to the coastal state. So when foreign people are in another country, they can run around, they can stroll around, they can visit certain areas, but they can't simply pick all the potatoes on the fields of that country, right? Because those potatoes belong to someone. Those potatoes are sources of that state. It is just the case also in the territorial waters of another state. They can sail through, but they cannot start fishing, for instance, because sources belong to the coastal state. The territorial waters of the coastal state are therefore exclusive fishery zone of the coastal state. I'm sure you have already seen it in the news from time to time. We come across that happens a lot in the Black Sea region. Either Turkish officials capture Russian fishermen, or Russian officials capture Turkish fishermen. And in the news, you see those poor men in their yellow boots waiting for the diplomats coming and keeping them and giving back to their own country. You have seen such things happening. So fishermen are allowed to fish only in the areas allowed for them in their own territorial waters. But once they stop watching their radars and counting the kilometers, and when they pass them across, then they're in wrong waters, and it is as if it is stealing the sources of another state. And therefore they are captured, and therefore the diplomats have to go there, pick them, and give them back, and so on. That's how it happens. let's talk a little bit about what innocent passage is. Innocent passage is a right. Now, that's what you know. Innocent passage is a right in territorial waters. You know this as well. It is not a right in internal waters. The question is, which passage is innocent? When is the passage innocent? And when it is not innocent anymore? First of all, the reason for this right is free trade, for international trade. And innocent passage is done by foreign vessels in the territorial waters of the coastal state. Innocent passage is innocent if it is not harming the peace, security, and good order of the coastal state. Peace, security, and good order of the coastal state must be respected. If there is a harm given to the peace of the coastal state, the passage is not innocent anymore. If security of the coastal state is threatened, then the passage is not innocent anymore. When the good order of the coastal state is disturbed, then the passage cannot be innocent anymore. So, while navigating, while passing through, the ship is not allowed to threaten the coastal state. Threatening cannot be done. They cannot start fishing there because it's not their zone to fish. What else? They cannot start exercises with their weapons. I tell you, showing the weapon is not okay. The ship can have weapons on it, but the ship is not allowed to start exercising with the weapons and explosives on it. What else? During the innocent passage, aircraft cannot land on or take off from the ship. If it's in the air, it has to remain there until the ship reaches to other waters. But it cannot land in there, or it cannot take off when it's doing its innocent passage. It cannot collect information. It cannot do any kind of propaganda. The ship is also not allowed to do any kind of research or exploration or surveys in the territorial waters of the coastal state. It cannot pollute the waters of the coastal state. It cannot load or unload any kind of commodity during the passage. So the passage must remain only as passage, but nothing else. All right? Then it is considered to be innocent. Could you follow everything until here? This is where I want to stop for this class. I hope you have taken down some notes, study them a little bit, because entire information that we're going to use is based upon those infos. All right? If you don't have any questions, then have a nice day.